everyone, it's me, Coms, and one of my favorite quarantine activities has been watching lots of movies. And I think in the beginning of quarantine I didn't really watch much. I just kind of went a long time without going to the movies because the theaters were closed and there was nothing coming out, so I was just like, there's nothing to watch. But then as it went on, I found some things on streaming services and started coming up with a long list. And eventually had this decision where I was just like, I'm gonna watch a movie every single day for 1 week. And that week turned into a month. And now I have a long list of movies that I want to recommend and some that I don't want to recommend. And I thought it'd be interesting for me to go through all of the movies that I watched in the past month, watching roughly one movie every single day. But I did skip some because there were some days I just didn't feel like watching a movie or there was stuff going on. For each movie, I'm gonna have a little blurb in the corner of what streaming services you can watch it on, since I've watched all of these, almost all, on streaming services like Netflix, Hulu, and Prime, so you guys can see where you can find those. The first movie I watched was on June 8th, and that was Lady Bird, and I really highly recommend this one. I really enjoyed watching it, and it's on Netflix, so a lot of people have access to watching it as well. I thought it was really good, especially if you like indie movies or high school coming of age sorts of stuff, because that's kind of what it is. And I was just surprised I hadn't watched this movie earlier. The next movie I watched is Teen Spirit, and it's about a singing competition show. I thought this one was really good, had great character, and overall really great movie and would recommend. The next movie I watched is Honey Boy, and I was really pleasantly surprised by this one. It has some great acting in it. However, I don't think it's the most fun or enjoyable movie. It's definitely more serious and deals with a lot of stuff, so just keep that in mind. Next is Overboard. This one's just like a fun comedy movie, and it has some great jokes in it. Although it's not my favorite movie of all time, it's still a fun, just light watch. I watched Artemis Fowl the day it came out on Disney+, and although I wasn't very impressed by it, I did think it was better than A Wrinkle in Time, which is another adaptation of a book Disney movie, so, you know, it's better. If you are a fan of Artemis Fowl or the book series, I recommend you watch it just to see what it's like and what makes it different than the book, but I didn't have that to compare it to, so I don't really know. Next up is Venice Back, and this is another serious and character-driven film. The acting is really great. I thought it was good, but be cautious when watching it because it deals with themes of addiction and drugs. The next day I watched Waves, which is interesting to say the least. The filming style is very different from most movies, which makes it kind of difficult to watch, but I think in general it was definitely different. That's all I'll say. The next movie I watched is Britney Runs a Marathon, and this one I would really recommend to a much wider audience than a lot of my other movies that I watched because it's not too serious, but it still has some really important messages and everything, and overall it's just a fun watch. Next I watched I Still Believe, and this one I found the acting and everything to be quite cringy. It was kind of odd, and I wasn't a big fan of this one. It has the guy from Riverdale, and would not recommend. Troop Zero is the next movie I watched, and although this movie stars kids, it's really good for people of all ages. It's not a kids movie, it's an everyone movie, and I thought it was really cute. The Hustle was a really good action comedy. I enjoyed watching it, but it didn't really have much depth movie-wise. It wasn't like amazing, it was just like a fun watch and like distraction, so I would recommend if you're in the mood for that. I didn't really have much high expectations for the Ramen Girl, but I was really pleasantly surprised by it, and I would recommend it to a lot of people. The acting was great, the story's good, and it's definitely more serious than the title suggests, so it's a definite underrated movie, would recommend. Next up I watched Palms, and I thought it was really fun. It's about a woman who moves into a retirement community and wants to start a cheerleading club, and I thought the premise was fun, and I watched the trailers but I'd never seen it before, so I was happy to watch it. Next up I watched Wildlife, and I feel like this is another one of those like character-driven movies with long periods of like acting. It's definitely well executed, and I think as a movie it's good, but I wouldn't recommend it to like the audience who just wants to watch a fun movie on the weekends. So keep that in mind when you watch that. Next up is Stuber, which is another action comedy about an Uber driver and someone who works for the police. And it was interesting and had a lot of violence, but in the end there was a lot of funny jokes, you know. It was pretty good. If you're up for violence, I would watch. Next up we have Second Act, which stars Jennifer Lopez kind of like conning her way into a really prestigious job. It was interesting and definitely better than I expected, but not amazing. It was a fun watch, but not amazing. The last movie I watched that week was A Better Life, and that's about a father and son struggling in Southern California to be successful and make a life for themselves. Really would recommend. I was excited about this movie, and it's kind of underrated I feel like because I haven't really heard much about it, but would recommend. Definitely watch this movie if you have the opportunity to. I started the next week by watching Gemini Man, and this one was an action movie. Nothing too impressive. It stars Will Smith, and it's about clones. Kind of fun, but not much happens that's exciting. I mean, if you like action movies, would recommend. If not, probably not. Next we have The Art of Racing in the Rain, and this one's about a dog and about a guy who races cars. So if either of those things sound intriguing, check it out. But for me, honestly, I'm not a really big fan of dog movies, so it wasn't my favorite. Now we're in July. The first movie I watched in July is My Spy, and it came out on Amazon Prime, so if you have Prime, you can watch it, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people have Prime. So this one was really good, and it's about a kid who has a run-in with a spy, and there's a lot of good comedy and some great characters, and I recommend this movie. It's fun, it's light, has some fun music, but it also has some serious points. The next movie I watched was The Impossible, and this is based off a true story about a family in a natural disaster, and I thought this one was interesting, especially because it's true. I also found myself kind of mildly uncomfortable with kind of the death and everything, probably because it was true, even though the death wasn't actual real death, but you know what I mean? Yeah, okay. The next day I watched Murder Mystery, which was a fun mystery. It was comedic because it starred Adam Sandler, and it was fun, but honestly, if you're going to watch a mystery, watch Knives Out. It's much better, much more twisty. This one kind of felt predictable, but just not exciting. But it was good, and I would recommend if you have Netflix that you check it out in your free time. The next day I watched Hamilton on Disney+. Would recommend if you're a fan of musicals or rap. It's definitely longer than the average movie, but it was fun, and it's well made, but not the most exciting if you're not paying the closest attention. Just keep that in mind. And I think since Hamilton's a big thing, watching Hamilton is definitely a must-do, so. The next movie I watched, Slumdog Millionaire. I knew this one won an Oscar for Best Picture, so I already was expecting it to be good, but it did not disappoint. This one's about a guy who grew up in India, and he's having flashbacks as he's on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. And that's kind of the premise, but very good movie, would recommend. Next, I watched Athelia, and I thought this one was okay. If you're a fan of Hamlet, I would recommend seeing this alternate perspective. For me, I didn't really know anything about Hamlet beforehand, so I thought it was an interesting period piece starring Daisy Ridley, who's in Star Wars, and I couldn't stop thinking of her as Rey from Star Wars when I was watching this, but I would recommend it if you like that sort of thing. It wasn't my favorite. Next up we have Speak, and this one stars Kristen Stewart, who you guys know from Twilight. Actually, I was impressed with her acting in this one. She was a little younger, and I thought the story was pretty good. It's just about this girl who kind of doesn't speak much, and she's really quiet, and throughout the movie you start to see why, and you see her kind of going through some stuff, Really good and kind of indie film, but would recommend, especially if you guys think Kristen Stewart's a bad actress, because this one, honestly, pretty good. Strangely, right after that one, we have Remember Me, which stars Robert Pattinson from Twilight, and I thought this movie was really good. I was really surprised, so I think it's best if you go in not knowing anything about it, but I do recommend you watch it. It's good, and I don't know what else to say. Next is Halle, and I'm a little conflicted about this movie because in some ways it's a really great movie about a girl in high school coming to terms with her family and her religion, and just the fact that it's a lot different from everyone else since she's an immigrant. Okay, she's not an immigrant, her parents are immigrants. But anyway, I feel like it also has some plot holes, and I don't really know what the point of the movie was, but I think it was okay. If you have Apple TV Plus, not many people do. Next on my list was Breakthrough, and I think this movie came out 1 or 2 years ago. I remember seeing trailers all over the place, and if you've seen the trailers, you kind of seen the movie, honestly, in my opinion. There wasn't anything too exciting in the movie, but the fact that it's a true story is great. That said, if you are religious or anything, I would recommend you give this movie a shot. It just depends on your beliefs and all that sort of thing. The last movie I watched that week is Longshot. I thought this one was funny, it's good, but it's kind of adult content, so keep that in mind. But I would recommend this movie for anyone who's interested in like comedy or politics or romance, or I thought this was a fun movie, and if you've seen the trailers, I recommend, if you like the trailers, to watch the movie, because that's what I did. The next movie I watched is The Banker, which is based on a true story, and it takes place in the 1950s, and it's about racism and banking, so if those interest you, then I would recommend this movie. Otherwise, maybe not. The next movie I watched is Loving, and this is another one that is based on a true story. It takes place in the 1950s as well, and it's also about racism. It's about an interracial couple, and if that interests you, I recommend watching it. It's not the most exciting thing ever since it's just based off real events, but it has some good acting in it. Especially during this time, it's important to educate yourself, so if you don't really know much about this, this might be a good way to learn about it. Next, I watched Astra, which is kind of like a space movie that takes place in the near future. I found this one kind of confusing and technical, but really well made, so if you are interested in kind of like space movies or anything in that sort, I recommend this one. It was well made, but kind of difficult to watch. And finally, most recently, I watched Greyhound, which stars Tom Hanks, and it's about US Navy in World War II, so if you like stories about war or about Navy, then I would recommend this one to you. Otherwise, which I'm not really interested in that, I didn't have the most exciting time watching it, but it is interesting to watch something different once in a while, especially with all the movies I watch. So, you know, if you've watched that many movies in your life, maybe it's time to watch one like this. So, I thought it was well made. Anyway, because I know that was a lot, I want to give my top recommendations on which movies from this list I would 100% recommend that you watch, because I watched all of these like 30-something movies so that you don't have to watch all of them. My recommendations and the top 5 movies I have on this list, not in any particular order, are Lady Bird, Teen Spirit, Britney Runs a Marathon, A Better Life, and Slumdog Millionaire. Of course, a lot more of these movies were good, but I think these ones are the best, and if you ever have the chance to watch them, highly recommend that you do. So, thank you guys so much for watching. If you'd like any other movie recommendations, let me know in the comments. If you have any movie recommendations for me, let me know in the comments. And until next time, bye guys!